Got word this afternoon that Joanne Brown's niece was killed in an automobile accident. And Rich stopped by to see her, is my understanding, and found out that she also has a fracture on her leg. Same leg, apparently she fractured her, well, she fractured her left leg, didn't she, or left kneecap? Well, she fractured her left leg, lower leg, so she's in a boot. So Joanne needs our prayers. We need to continue to pray for Lois and Sherry. Sherry goes up and helps them out as much as she can, wearing her down too. And pray for Rich that he'll be a little more kind to Sherry and treat her nicer. All right, other prayer requests. Betty Sullins got word that there was no problems with anything in her back, or just strained muscles apparently, so keep praying for her. Frankie?
They changed Linda's surgery from the 1st to the 16th.
Well, I just have to add a 6 to that one then. Okay, Linda Hutton for her hip surgery. Pardon me? It's handwritten. We got that either Sunday or a week ago Sunday or sometime. Linda Hutton is Joe Houston's sister-in-law?
They're my sister and Joe's sister.
Oh, sister, okay. Okay. Just trying to work that out. Are you here? Okay, we'll take your prayer request.
Keep praying for a family friend. I talked to Pete about him, but I wasn't sure if he's let you know that he was stabbed 14 times when his home was broken into on, I think it was Sunday night or Monday night.
But I never got a name or any details other than just Paul.
His name is Paul John, and he was in critical condition, but I just found out from my mom yesterday evening that he has been moved into a regular room. He's not quite out of the woods yet, but he is not in the critical stage anymore. They've got a bunch of tubes hooked up to him to keep his lungs inflated and everything. Both of them collapsed. He suffered cuts to his chest, his back, his legs, and arms. He fought the guys off and actually tried to chase him down before the blood loss got to be too much, and he couldn't breathe while he was passed out.
Was it a robbery?
They were trying to rob him. He refused to open his safe, so they attacked him.
You know, how do I say this and not sound like a warmonger? You folks, if you're not protected at home, can I put it that way? You need to have some type of secure locks on your doors. And you need to really think this thing through about how you're going to handle it. And I'm going to say when, because if the bottom drops out everything, it will be a matter of when, not if. But if and when it ever happens, what's your plan? You know, when we were younger, we taught our kids, if the house catches on fire, we do this, and we meet you here. Well, you need some type of a plan about if you have a home invasion and have the opportunity to react, what are you going to do? In my case, I'm going to run to Pat's house and get a gun. That's where all of mine are.
I will say this much: he had the locks on his doors and everything. What happened was they pulled the AC out of his window. They literally pulled it out of his window, and that's what woke him up. And when he came downstairs, they grabbed him.
Don't have an AC in the window. Nail it shut if you do. Make sure it's secured in there. If you're secure, you're sitting in there with duct tape around it. I'm telling you, we live in a bad time. This morning, the girl got shot doing a live broadcast from some nut. I told Butch, I think we need to go to, I think it was in Richmond, wasn't it? Richmond, Virginia. We need to go down there and have a White Lives Matter rally, and I want to break into a CVS and get some toilet paper. That's what everybody else does. That's what they did in Baltimore. Ferguson. We do need to pray for our nation. Let's just, I'm joking a little bit about it, but we do need to pray for our nation because we live in a mess. We live in a mess where they're trying their best to take any type of defense away from the normal people, and so all the bad people and crazies will have stuff, and we're going to be at their mercy. We need to pray like John did. Even so, come, Lord Jesus. Come quickly. Tonight. We're not in a hurry, Lord, but right now would be good. Anybody else? Prayer request? Rich.
May, as school starts up, I'll be on the road a lot with those sports trips coming up now.
We're praying for those kids till you get those cataracts taken care of. Ruth, did I see your hand slip up?
Irma also said that her son, I don't know his name, but was taken to the hospital on Monday and had a heart catheterization, and everything was okay, but he has a viral, some kind of a viral disease or something, and they wanted him to take, some time off from work and so forth, and they're treating him to protect his heart, she said.
Maybe a heart virus?
No, she said it was viral and it was, that's all that they told her. She said they can't treat the virus, but they were giving him some kind of medicine to try to protect his heart. And he was supposed to take it easy for a couple of weeks, but he was wanting to go back to work, but she wanted prayer for him.
Okay. Irma's son has some type of a viral condition. So we're praying for him. You know his name? What's his name? Brad. His name is Brad. Anybody else?
My mother-in-law, Josh's mom, Karen, just last Friday, she went through and had, they did an operation and they removed a small lump or tumor from her breast. So she's still healing. She went through the operation okay and everything. It's just, it's a long time healing. And with her allergies, it seems like everything they've given her, she's allergic to, so they're trying to find new pain meds and stuff for her and everything. I feel really bad for her, but just pray for her healing.
Okay. Karen for an operation recovery. Anybody else? Barbara?
Bob has two children that are not saved. Their names are Nicole and Stu. And we'd like to get them on the list, please.
Nicole and Sue.
Stu.
S-U-E.
Stu, S-T-U.
Stewart.
Yes,
A girl and a boy.
yeah,
Okay, I thought it was two girls. I got it now. Stu. S-T-E-W.
no, S-T-U.
S-T-U.
Stu.
S-T-U. That's almost like S-T-P. You're laughing. Nobody knows what S-T-P is anymore. Gene, did your hand go up? Okay, Shirley.
Casey came in from rehab today, so really pray for her.
Okay. And I saw another hand. Kathleen. So Andrew got a job at Walmart, goes in next Thursday for orientation. Okay. Where do I have him? I think I have him. Thought I had him. Maybe not. For Andrew's job at Walmart. Michael's been there almost 5 years. Pushing carts, 5 years. The rain and the sleet and the snow and the heat and the wind and the crabby customers. Anybody else? All right, Patrick, why don't you lead us tonight and just remember all these new ones and many of the old ones as you need to. Or let's do it this way. How many of you have a list? Do you have the whole list? Yep. Why don't you take the first half and Rich will take the second half? I see him looking at Sherry's list. We'll put our two deacons to work tonight, all right? Let's go to the Lord in prayer.
Gracious Heavenly Father, we love you and thank you for all that you are, Father, all that you provide. And we just thank you for the privilege to come to you in prayer. Father, we thank you for the miracle that you would hear each individual prayer, Father, and they're important to you. We pray for each one of the individuals on this list tonight, as well as those that we have not spoken of or we may have in our hearts and
Genesis chapter 13. We've been talking about a man who has an unusual name. His name is what? Abram. And what happens to his name after a while? We haven't gotten there yet. God changes it to Abraham. And his wife had a funny name too. Her name was Sarai, and God changes her name later on too. And we're at the point now where we've seen that he was called out of his homeland to go to a place that he didn't know where to go to. And he had followed God's leading, but then he had a lapse of faith and wandered down into Egypt, came back into Canaan, and that's where we left him last week. This week we're going to see that Abram had some trouble, and it's family trouble. But before we get into it, I want you to think about, as I have been noticing more and more the older I get, how lives are intertwined. How when you do something or decisions you make or choices you make don't just affect you. They affect other people around you. Abraham made some choices from the very beginning that affected other people around him. And as he made some good choices, it affected them in a good way. And then when he made some bad choices, it affected them in a bad way. And I wonder how many times we have inadvertently caused harm to those we love simply because we've made bad choices. In this case, Abraham didn't really make a bad choice. He separated from Lot. He gave Lot choice, and we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But even in that, those decisions to separate affected Lot and the people that were around him. So we want to think tonight about the trouble that Abraham had with Lot in this passage. It's not the end of his trouble, but it is the beginning of the trouble for Abraham and Lot. Chapter 13, verses 5 to 13. Who wants to read? Isabel, you read the first 4, and Barbara, you read the last 4.
Genesis 13:5. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelt then in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, I will go to the left.
And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest into Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly.
So here we have the situation. They've traveled now together. They left the homeland together. They went down into Egypt apparently together. They came back out of Egypt together. And now they're dwelling together, but they have this troublesome problem that has sprung up. And what a problem to have. We have too much. Your flocks are growing at such a rate that we don't have enough land for my flocks and your flocks to dwell together in the same place and have enough to eat. So the cause of that problem was they had gained more than they had capacity where they were living as one group to have the animals have enough pasture land to eat. there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having stuff as long as the stuff doesn't have you. There's nothing wrong with having multiples of stuff as long as that stuff doesn't have you. That the stuff that we have, if we use it properly, God can benefit our lives from it and benefit the lives of others. So there's nothing inherently wrong about having a lot of possessions. It is wrong when they cause trouble. And we see that is the problem that we see here. The cause of the problem was that their stuff was starting to interfere with each other. But then there was a course that the problem was taking, and their problem was not being resolved. Now, here's the problem that I have with Abraham. There's a difference between a leader and someone who is a reactionary. Someone who is decisive sees a problem before it becomes a problem. Someone who is a real leader tries to head that problem off by making decisions that will benefit the whole group. In this case, it seemed as if Abraham was not willing to make that decision to separate from Lot. Now, that's my take on it. You may see it different, and that's all right because the Bible doesn't really say. But in my opinion, had he set up some guidelines before, it wouldn't have grown, the problem wouldn't have grown. We see it starting as a problem just where the herds aren't able to find enough water and grass to graze. But then the herdsmen started fighting between themselves because they were fighting for enough land for their herd to prosper in spite of what happened to somebody else. So maybe he waited just a little too long to take action. I don't know. But the course of the problem was not getting better. It was getting worse. And that seems to be always the case. If you have a splinter in your finger and you don't take care of it, does it get better or worse? If you stab your toothpick into your finger, and even when you try to take care of it, sometimes it gets worse. But the truth is, problems very seldom solve themselves. Physical problems are the same way. If you have a toothache, as some have had in the past, and some probably will have in the future, and maybe some of you have toothaches now or tooth problems now, if you don't take care of that tooth problem, it does not get better. You may reach a point where the pain will stop, but shortly after that, the tooth will start to fall out in pieces, and then you have a hole where the tooth should have been. Problems don't solve themselves. A leader in a situation tries to recognize problems before they happen and do something about them before they happen. In the military, what would we call that, Patrick? We've talked about it. Proactive and contingency plans, right? If this does start to sprout, how are we going to handle it? I get tickled, and I told Pat, we had this discussion, I get tickled every now and then when people say that the government or the Pentagon doesn't have any plans. Well, when I was in the military, we were constantly practicing plans that somebody thought up. I don't know if it was a Pentagon or local, but they always had these contingency plans. What time would we have to leave the base if we had to get to such and such a place by such and such a time? As a matter of fact, one of my jobs was at one point I had to know the dimensions of every piece of automotive type equipment on base and how to get it on an airplane in the least possible time with the most effective packing of that equipment, speaking of trucks and cars and vehicles, how to get it on an airplane to get it in a timely manner to get it to where it needed to go. We practice that. Well, in a home, what do? Do you wait until your child throws a rock through the neighbor's window, or do you counsel that child, I'll say counsel, the first time you see him picking rocks up and throw them in directions that they shouldn't be thrown in? Now, I've always thought it useless to tell a little boy not to throw rocks. I mean, he's going to throw rocks. But I always try to tell him you don't throw toward people, cars, animals, or anything that will break, right? You throw it at a tree, that's okay. Throw it at the side of the barn, that may be all right. But you don't throw it at the neighbor's house or the neighbor's cat or our dogs or cats. Don't throw it at anybody. You try to teach them where to throw it. So you come up with these plans ahead of time. That's being proactive. That's not being a reactionary. Sometimes we call it now a knee-jerk reaction. Something happens and you make a split decision about how to handle the problem. So the problem was not getting better, it was getting worse. Our nation is not getting better, it's getting worse. So Abram and Lot both understand that this is a situation that has to be handled. But I want you to see in verses 8 and 9 how tenderly Abraham approaches this situation. He says there in verse 8, and Abraham said unto Lot, let there be no strife. That's a good place to start. Let's not fight about this. There's a solution. Let's come with a solution. Let's not fight about it. What do we do in our business meetings? Isn't this what we practice? Let's not fight about it. Let there be no strife. We can talk things out. We're adults. I have this problem when people start yelling. I've counseled couples for years and try to practice it myself. The Bible says a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. As soon as the strife starts and somebody starts yelling, somebody stops listening. Maybe it's both people stop listening when both people start yelling. I don't know, but let there be no strife. Let's not handle that this way. I know we could go to war over it. We really could. We could split down the middle and we could start fighting physically one another, and our herdsmen could kill each other's herdsmen, and we could rustle each other's cattle, if you put it that way. But let's not do that. He says, I pray thee between me and thee, and between my herdsman and thy herdsman. And here's the reason. What's the reason? For we're brethren. We're relatives. There's something about your relatives. No matter how bad they are, you still love them, right? I mean, I have some knuckleheads that I'm related to. I don't spend a lot of time around them when they're involved with certain activities, but I still love them. I have cousins that I love dearly, and some of them are often involved in activities that I don't approve of, but I don't have to answer for them. I love them anyway. That's the same overriding principle that we should have in our church and in our families. We're brethren. Why do we have to come to a place where you're going to slap one another, hit one another, scream at one another, cuss one another out, call people names that you really don't mean, and when you calm down, you're not sure how to get past it then? Why don't we just realize, let there not be any strife, let's not argue and fight and scream, sit down like adults and come to a conclusion. We're brethren. There's no reason for brethren to want to hurt one another. I was thinking about this morning. What was the first murder in the Bible? Cain and Abel, brothers. What caused that? Jealousy or pride, probably. And what causes most of our strife with our brethren? Jealousy or pride, probably, right? We don't like that we didn't get our own way. We think they shouldn't get their own way. And so Abram here pleads for peace. He has this plea. Please, let's not fight. And look at the sweetness of his words. It's a loving uncle that is speaking to his nephew here, and he's saying it just as sweetly as possible. Let there be no fighting. They were brethren. They should not have to fight. Look in John chapter 13 and verse 35. First one gets it. Raise your hand. I might give you a prize if you read it. John 13:35. Patrick, you got it?
By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love for one another.
Okay, here's your prize. You ready? Can you catch that far? Probably not. I probably can't throw it. I probably can't throw it.
Don't throw things at Edna.
I wasn't throwing at her, because if I was throwing at her, I'd probably hit Laura. That's how good my aim is. But the truth is, he comes to them and he says, we're brethren, let's not fight. And what did Jesus say? By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you have. Now, remember, this building has a history of non-loving churches. Really does. This building, before we replaced the windows, had one strange window over on that side where they had had a fight 2 churches ago, not the last church that was here, but the one before it, where they got in a fight literally and one person threw another person through the window. Why would that be in a church? Why would it ever come to that? Poor Mr. Taylor says, young man, please don't let them start fighting. And I said, well, they can fight if they want to, but I'm going home. I don't like church fights. I don't like church arguments. I can say this, and I think say it honestly. We have had some long drawn-out discussions in our business meetings from time to time, but they have never been unkind, and they have never been anything that affected the ministry of the church or the relationship of the folks between us. And we need to constantly remind ourselves of that. That should be our goal. But not just here in church. A soft answer turneth away wrath, grievous words stir up anger. What about our homes? You know, at home we seem to be able to let our hair down. We don't have to put on that phony smile. How's things going? Oh, things going just fine. And you get home and things aren't really fine, are they sometimes? The kids give you trouble. Somebody posted on Facebook, would you slap your brother for $10,000? I've responded, I'd slap him sometimes for $10, and other days it wouldn't even take $10 for me to slap him. But the truth is, we don't respond that way at home, or we shouldn't, because that soft answer and that love should also integrate into our homes. So they were brethren. But there's another reason why they should not act that way. In verse 7, it says, a Canaanite and a Pezerite dwelt in the land. And that reason is not quite as evident, but if you think about it, lost people were watching how they were responding to each other. Lost people watch us about how we live our lives also. If we're going to respond in anger, we're going to respond in strife, they're going to say, well, why do I need what you have? If we're going to respond to one another without love, they're looking for somebody that will unconditionally accept them just where they are. And apparently we wouldn't be that kind of people if we're responding in an unloving manner toward one another. So there's two reasons there why they should get along. But there was also a price that Abram paid for that peace that he was looking for. He tells in verse 9, he says, is not the whole land before us? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, the left hand, then I will go to the right. If thou wilt depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. So what was the price he was paying? Not taking first choice. What else? He capitulated, or he was submissive. Let's put it that way. He was submissive even though he was the elder. Now, how does it work with us? If we think we outrank the other person, we're going to say, this is what I'm going to do, and you do this. He didn't go that route. His kindness, his meekness and sweetness and submissiveness is so overbearing in this story, it really should challenge us. He paid the price of his own level of respect or position. He thought about others more than he thought about himself. Isn't that what it says in Philippians? Think not every man on his own things, but think also on the things of others. We're to be more concerned about how others come out of the deal more than how we come out of the deal. I hear this sometimes. You sit down, you go to a meal, and a girl or a guy that's waiting on you is having a bad day or something's going wrong. And I heard one guy say, well, if I don't like the service, I don't leave anything but a penny and I put it face down. And I often wonder when a server is having a bad day, you don't know what's going on in their life. I've come to the pulpit at times when people in the church have been on death's door, and I'm sure my demeanor that morning was not as good as it is most mornings. I've come to the pulpit when I've been sick or not feeling good, and I'm sure that I was not exposing the love of Christ or the testimony of Christ as much as I have at other days. Why don't we, instead of being so critical, instead of giving a 10% tip to somebody that's giving you bad service, give them 20%. Well, why do that? They didn't give me good service, because you might help their day to go a little better. You might show that you're going to do your best to go out of your way to help them in spite of what happened to you. Now, if they're just completely out and out rude, that may be a different thing. I'm not talking about that. But somebody that maybe, anybody here ever been a waitress? Have you ever worked and suddenly you have more tables than you thought you were going to be waiting on? Yeah, because somebody didn't show up, right? And what did you do? You went crazy trying to serve everybody properly. Do your tables know that? No, it's like nurses. Nurses go to work and they don't know if they're going to have enough staff on to cover everybody, and sometimes they have to take extra patients. And it gets sometimes a little impatient for the patients patients get impatient because you ring the buzzer and somebody's not there right on the next beep of the bell. Well, they may be doing a code blue down the hallway and there's not enough nurses to go around. So the nurse comes back in, the waitress comes back, and we throw a fit with them. Well, we don't know. I'm saying Abraham here was saying, I don't have to get my own way. What did that show about Abraham? What had God done to him? He blessed him. He told him he was going to bless him. I'm thinking possibly by this time Abraham's starting to mature a little bit. And maybe he's saying to himself, it doesn't really matter which side I go or where I go. God can make the desert to bloom. God can make my calves and my cattle fat on acreage that other people without the blessing of God couldn't raise cattle on. My sheep and my oxen, and with God's blessing, can do much better than someplace without God's blessing. And so he was willing to trust God and take a back seat, give Lot first choice. But it also had this promise of peace. Why did he want to do that? He wanted to do that because he wanted peace in the family. He wanted nothing to come between him and the people that he loved. We're not always that way, are we? Isabel, if Rebecca makes chocolate chip cookies and Patrick comes home and there's only one left, how does he respond? Don't tell me, because I already know the story. But the truth is, at our house, we used to have a saying, if there's one left, it's Dad's. And there was probably a time I would get a little disappointed with people if they didn't leave Dad's piece of apple pie on a plate, or peach cobbler in a bowl, or banana pudding in a bowl. But the truth is, what difference does it make? Somebody said it this way. They said, how many things in eternity are we going to look back on and say, why did we even bother discussing it, much less fighting about it? Right? They really don't matter. Here, Abraham and Lot are talking about their livelihood, but because of that peace that he wanted in his family, he was willing to give Lot first choice. But then in verses 10 to 13, we see this problem with Lot. Lot comes up with a tragic plan. Lot was not trusting God. Lot looked up and he said, well, over here I've got some good watered plains and there's pasture over there, there's water over there. There's even some cities out in that area that I can get provisions from and do my trading with, and so I can have commerce and I can build a business and I can get even richer. So he chose the absolute best. In verse 10, I want you to underline one word there, or a couple of words. It says, and Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plains of Jordan. He lifted up his eyes. He walked by sight. When he saw the well-watered plains of the Jordan, and he saw all that was down in that area, he wanted that. He desired that because he was walking by sight and not walking by faith. We live a life till we get to heaven where we're walking not always by faith, but by sight. Sometimes the flesh gets a hold of us, and we start to look at what's going on around us, and we either lose hope or throw in the towel or think that we can't have God's best going the direction we're going. And as Abram did in the last week's lesson, we go back to Egypt. When we're not walking by faith, we're walking by sight. How's your eyesight? Have you ever done any of those optical illusion things where you look at two lines and the surrounding around those two lines and it says which one's longer, and one looks to be absolutely the longest, and yet when you measure them, they're exactly the same length? Our physical eyesight does not give us a spiritual eyesight. You may see physically 20/20, but your spiritual eyesight may be far from that. When we're trusting God, we have to look to God and see what direction he wants us to go in. Abram had already known that it didn't matter what direction, God was going to go with him and God would bless him. He had the whole land. And so Lot looked at the best portion of the land, and the physical eyesight said that's the way to go. And it wasn't the way to go. Now remember, I said decisions leave ripples to other people's lives. You're intertwined with the decisions you make. We tell our kids you're free to make your own decisions and choices, but you're not free to choose the consequences that it brings. Sometimes we make our own choices as Lot did, but it brings consequences that we cannot choose. This choice almost cost him his daughters. This choice did cost him his wife. This choice did cost him his business. This choice did cost him everything. But he wasn't seeing it because he was walking by sight and not by faith. He lived by sight. In verse 11, it tells us, then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. He went toward the best that he saw for himself. Selfish to the core. And we have people around us that way, don't we? My way or the highway. Pete and I were talking about preachers on the way down to the college Monday. And we got to talking about how some preachers become more dictatorial than they are lovers of the flock and shepherds of the flock. I've known preachers. I worked for a preacher. It was his way or the highway. He and the deacons would get in literal fistfights over basketball games, and I'd be in between the deacons and the pastor, literally holding them apart, trying to keep them from swinging at one another. And sat in deacons meetings when the pastor would throw a fit and resign on the spot, and there's just this constant turmoil, constant strife, because it had to be his way or the highway. Folks, it ought to be God's way. That ought to be our goal. My way is not always the best way. I get some ideas. Sometimes I think they're really good, and I'll start to run them past some people, past some of the men, and they'll start to say, well, did you think about this, or did you think about this? And by the time they get done talking, I'm thinking, well, who came up with that stupid idea? And blame it on Rich. No, I don't blame it on Rich. But the concept is here that Lot lived for himself. Lot went toward Sodom. He left the life of a pilgrim behind in verses 12 and 13, and it says he went and lived in Sodom. And Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent toward Sodom. The magazine back there, God Bless America Crusade magazine, we prayed last year for Byron Fox and a crusade they were having. They're having another one this year, the weekend before we're having our Jubilee down in Richmond, Virginia. And it's going to be live streamed on internet. If you have opportunity to look at it, you ought to look at it. But one article in that magazine talks about Jesus went amongst all the cities and preaching. And he talked about how many churches have left the inner city and given up on the inner city, moved to the suburbs where the affluence is and where it's safer and where you can keep your stuff more safe. But the truth is, cities need the gospel. And so he has a burden to reach the big cities. Well, Lot didn't go to Sodom and Gomorrah to change them. Lot went to Sodom and Gomorrah, and he was changed by them. So sadly, we see that Lot's way of reacting to this trouble was the way most folks do. They want to get the best for themselves that they can get out of it, regardless if it's right or not. And in choosing to get the sweetest land and the best land, he ended up losing everything on a couple occasions. And we need to think this through. God has this in the Word of God on purpose. I'm teaching a class this semester called the Pentateuch. And the Pentateuch is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And folks say, well, why would you study those first 5 books of the Bible? Well, that's where God tells us the beginnings of everything, tells us the law that he lays down and shows how men failed in the beginning, to try to give us a foundation to keep us from going that direction. And here's the foundational truth of Lot going into worldliness. It will cost you more than you want to pay. It may look good on the outside, but on the inside, it's not very good. One of my favorite pies, I love pie, by the way, but one of my favorite pies is peach pie. We were somewhere not long ago on one of our trips and in a store, and I passed a stack of individual peach pies. And they were only like 50 cents. And I said, man, I'm going to get a couple of those. So I got me one, got Carolyn one. And we got back to the car, and I opened mine up. I said, this is going to be good. Peach pie. Man, peach pie. And I bit into that thing, and guess what it was? Peach jelly. There wasn't a peach in the thing. And it wasn't that good. It was kind of bittersweet. You know, I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of sweet, but not sweet. Tart, I guess is how you say it. Wasn't really good. The crust wasn't very good. But the packaging made it look so attractive. You know, my mouth was watering before I ever got that thing open. That's what Satan does to us. He gives us something so good looking, and he wraps it so well. And our mouth starts watering, as it were. And we unwrap it and we bite into it and we find out it's nothing like what it's claimed to be. And most of the time, we've spent good money on something. Most of the time, we've wasted time out of our life on something. Most of the time, we've wasted time we could have been closer to the Lord. Can you imagine what a difference it would have made? Can I rewrite the Bible? Of course not. But let me give you an alternative. This is a make-believe story. Abraham says to Lot, you choose and I'll go the other way. So Lot chooses to go away from Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham chooses to go to Sodom and Gomorrah because that's the only direction left. Lot became a leader in Sodom and Gomorrah. I think maybe Abraham could have been an evangelist to Sodom and Gomorrah. See the difference? The difference is not really the direction he took, but it was the hard attitude when he got there. The reason he took that direction. Byron Fox is going into the inner cities to reach them for Christ. The churches are leaving the inner cities because they don't want to put up with all the problems. What's the difference? The churches are still preaching the gospel, but they're wanting to reach people outside of the inner city rather than the inner city. Byron Fox is saying those folks outside of the inner city have churches galore. The inner city's going to the devil's way too quickly. We're giving up, and we shouldn't. And so he's taking the gospel back to inner cities. The truth is we do it in our own lives. Lot's way or Abram's way. Following after what our flesh sees or following after what our spirit says is right. Let's not walk by sight. Let's walk by faith. Lot walked by sight. Abraham walked by faith. Father, I pray that as we've gone through this Bible study tonight on Abram's life, that you'll again impress us with the truth of your goodness. Impress us with the truth of the world's wickedness. And I pray as we continue through this study later on and see the results of Lot's choice, we'll remember it all started because he lifted up his eyes and beheld. It all started in the Garden of Eden when Eve saw that the fruit was good to eat. And I pray that you'd help us realize that we need to look to you and not allow our flesh to be the guiding light. In Jesus' name, amen. Birthday night. How many of you had birthdays this month? Any birthdays this month from over here? Brittany, I knew there was a reason you came tonight. Anybody else? All right, let's sing happy birthday to Brittany one